Okay, we are going to continue with our discussion on modeling, etc. And the next step in this case is docking. So, just want to let you know there, once you install uh, AutoDock Vina, the software that we're going to use, you'll see that it's typically located, wherever you store it, it's located in the Scripps Research Institute folder because that is where AutoDock and AutoDock Vina, etc., were developed. AutoDock was a typically docking software is very hard to use. But AutoDock Vina was, in my opinion, a revelation because it was the first time that somebody developed a docking software that you could in real time visualize what the results were, what was happening, etc. Of course, there is a kind of a weird parallel between the development of docking software for example, academia versus industry. Industry, the software, the docking software is available. It's a lot easier to use. It does docking in seconds. I've had the good fortune of using the software created by Biosolve IT, which is a drug design company in St. Augustine in Germany. And you just specify the protein, you specify the ligand, and there's some input parameters, and you get the docking takes place instantly. And then, if, for example, if some docking is not biochemically feasible, etc., you can discard those docking arrangements. The next best thing, obviously, is something like AutoDock Vina, which has become really popular. And the chief developer was Dr. Oleg Trot, whose video tutorial we are going to follow very closely because pretty much if you follow that tutorial, you'll be in good shape as far as using the software is concerned. Now you'll see that. It's a 32-bit software, which means you should know where to store it if you want it to work. You still use the MGL tool software that we will use to do all the visualization for Vina. And if you look here, for example, you'll see Vina, and I double click it, and it has all the executable and that's what you're going to use to install it. There is another place where the Vina files exist, and that is, what do you need? You need to dock a ligand inside a putative, a potential, a relevant, biochemically relevant docking area for a region, a binding region for of a protein. Uh, you know, Sometimes depending upon the nature, the three-dimensional, sometimes a quaternary structure, you might get different positions. So going into the docking process, if you have some idea as to where the likely docking is going to occur, that is helpful. Okay. So let's do this. Let's go to the tutorial. Uh, Again, the tutorial, as you can see here, is old. Differences are unavoidable. The program all is now called out, etc. But let's not worry too much about it. You have input files in the Vina tutorial.zip. And yes, of course, the tutorial is also available as the movie file is also available. We can always download and install. It contains 3 files, actually 2, and that is the ligand file and the protein file. Now, you can start out with a PDB file, and from our discussion, and you can look at the video about PDB, there is a certain format for PDB files. There's some additional information that's added, which kind of looks like a PDB file. It's called a PDBQT file, and so that's what we can also look for. So I'm going to download it, and I'm going to open the file. So even if I extract the file in my downloads, which is something I should be able to use, I just have to be able to, so I'm extracting it right here, just so you can see what the tutorial file contains, and you can see Ligand Experiment, and the protein PDB. And those are the files that we need to look at. Let's do this. Let's open. I use my trusted Notepad++. And you'll see that this is the ligand file. Again, none of the fancy things that you would typically expect from a protein database, from a PDB file, that is the structure information, etc. But once again, let's, and this is het atom. Het atom is when the atom comes from a source other than the protein. Okay, so take a look at it. So for example, we have het atom, atom 1. This tells you this is a carbon. And this is the ligand now. Okay, so we'll worry about what the ligand is later. That's the name. That is typically where you would find the name of the amino acid residue. Here's the position number, X, Y, Z. This is the atom type. This is the thermal factors. In this case, we're not really concerned about thermal factors, so that is set as 0. And then this is the multiplicity. This is where how many atoms occupy one particular position. Okay, so we'll keep that open. We'll also see what the ligand experiment is, and that tells you experimentally you found a whole bunch of additional information where everything else is the same, but you have some thermal parameters. So this is, for example, if you determined from some sort of a crystal structure arrangement, you'll actually get the thermal factors, because the thermal factor, the temperature factors, also called as the Debye-Waller factors, are the parameters, is information related to the thermal vibration, which is associated with the smear of the density. Okay, and so we'll open the next file, and that is the protein PDB file. And so it's protein ligand, and now it's more recognizable. So atom, right? Het atom is something that's not an atom that does not belong to a protein, so that's an easy demarcation. The number of the atom, the type of the atom, obviously, well, it starts with a methionine. This is from some chain B of something. It starts with 225, and that's why there's 202, so X, Y, Z. There's thermal factors here, and the other number is 1. Okay, so we have all our files. They are open, and we should be ready to go. So once again, what we can do is focus on the tutorial, stop, and if I need to talk about something interesting or need to explicate a little bit based on what Dr. Trott is talking about, I'll stop, and you can switch to me, and then that's how we'll actually do this.
Here tutorial is about Vina, a program I wrote while.
So I'm just going to stop that for a second and editorialize a little bit, because this is not being the closed caption is automatic. It's based on whatever speech-to-text recognition that Google has in YouTube, and it's not necessarily going to be very good, but it'll do. And again, if there's something really bad, I'll interject and talk over it.
In the Molecular Graphics Lab at the Scripps Research Institute. I'm going to be using this structure.
So what he's talking about is he's going to use one IEP, and once again, it would behoove you to go to the PDB and look for structure 1 IEP. Now, we already have the protein. He's already given us the protein. We can use that protein, but again, that's not what the primary concern is. So again, it's part of the deal where you say, I want to go and find out something a little more, and so it's one IEB, and it'll tell you what that protein is. It's the histocompatibility antigen, and you'll see this is the structure of the protein. Okay, and then he's going to have a ligand, and you can tell that the ligand is imatinib. And this paper was published, obviously he's not part of this paper, but this paper was published in 2002, and it was published in Cancer Research. So what he wants to do is he wants to use this information about this as part of the discussion.
That is a receptor that binds an anti-cancer drug called imatinib, and I will be using a randomized structure of this drug molecule and try to predict its bound conformation in the receptor.
So once again, remember the point about docking is drug design. We have various receptors, and each of those receptors are responsible for a particular function, and the idea is to create drugs that will very specifically target the receptors. Now remember the point about drug design, and so in order for you to understand in silico, in a computational way, how these interactions are likely to take place, you say, I want this very, very specific information, and I want to know how it will interact. And then you say, well, do I need to do some targeted mutations to see if those interactions change, how the receptor responds structurally to this kind of docking, okay? And this is one of the reasons why the impetus for drug design software to do hundreds and thousands of these kinds of interactions. So the impetus for them to develop the software is actually quite high. Now, so this is kind of the process of drug design, and then along the way you look at your molecule, you look at the parts of the molecule that are efficacious, you look at the process of that's toxic, because for example, whenever we talk about you watch TV and sometimes they say, oh, here's a drug and it's available in the market, and here's a laundry list of side effects, right? And the side effects, depending upon the intensity of the side effects and the chronic nature of the side effects, these are often these side effects could anything from something mild that you can overlook, or something potentially even that might result in death. So there's already toxic features, and it seems as if the overall consensus is the FDA is creating greater and greater pressure on, and again this is more a socio-political side of things, greater and greater pressure on pharmaceutical companies, because they seem to be stuck in some sort of a rut and cannot get past the typical toxicities. And so, medicinal chemists, they do a lot of work to try and understand, what's toxic, what's not toxic, whether something can be synthesized in an organic chemistry lab, etc. So a lot of very interesting work that's going on. So this is the one IEB, the antigen, histocompatibility antigen, and the imatinib small molecule. So one's your protein, the other is your ligand. Let's keep going.
Vina is the program that actually does the docking. It takes its input in the Pdb file format.
Okay, so again, it's not very clear, and he's got a different way of talking. So we use MGL tools to download the visualization software, and the MGL tools, for those of you who've already looked at it, already has looks like it's a PyMol based, with slight modifications. The Vina is the one that it's probably a more a more modern version right now of Vina, a kind of an updated version of Vina. And so again, we have what's called a Pdb file. So I'm looking at each of these files, the Vina tutorial, and you'll see that this is in the Pdb format. But what it does is it adds two more columns, some sort of a charge thing, and it's called the PdBQT, which he hasn't articulated very carefully. Okay, and so this is this is him talking, and again I'll try not to interrupt, but sometimes it's necessary. So for example, you see he's trying to say PdBQT, but the speech to text recognition just called it PPT. And if, for example, you were not listening to what he's saying, so again, you can keep this this video at the back of your mind while you're doing this, just so you know what he's trying to say. You might think, for example, because this is not it's not converted to text properly, you might think, oh, he's talking about some sort of a PowerPoint, right? And clearly that's not true. So I'll editorialize whenever necessary.
And I will be using AutoDock tools.
So AutoDock tools, but it's not AudioDuct tools, it's AutoDock tools. He's also not very clear, but again, he's given us this wonderful tool, so we can overlook that.
As part of MGL tools, also developed in our lab. MGL stands for Molecular Graphics Lab.
So Micrographics Lab, and again, I'm going to stop doing this, making these corrections, but Molecular Graphics Lab, MGL.
Vina produces output in the same PDBQT file format. I can use either MGL tools or PyMol to view the results. And I will be demonstrating the use of PyMol for this. Note that I'm using this version of MGL tools, which is the latest non-beta version as of now.
And now is a long time ago.
I'm also using this older version of PyMol because it seems to be better at displaying small molecule PDBQT files for my purposes than the current version.
So once again, the formats are PDB and PDBQT. Okay, and as these files get generated, we'll be able to see exactly what those files are.
This older version.
And once again, you watch this video because this is going to be part of your exam. You'll have to go back and forth, just stop, follow the procedure exactly as he outlines it, and you should generally be okay. And eventually you'll get pretty good at it. But I find that rather than teach this off, just from my own, just following this the tutorial step by step is really the best way to do it. Okay, so we have PDB, but in order for this to work, you have to convert it into what's called PDBQT.
Is available here. Before we begin, a few words about the theory. We are considering a system consisting of the receptor and the ligand. In water, I collectively refer to their degrees of freedom as conformation. For each conformation, there is a corresponding potential energy value. However, because we are considering the solvent implicitly, what we have is actually an energy-like quantity. It is often said that the global minimum corresponds to the native conformation. However, this is not quite correct. A deeper but narrower well may actually be less preferable because of the entropy. The quantity we are most interested in is called the chemical potential. It can be used to calculate the free energy of binding and the affinity of the ligand to the receptor. However, calculating the chemical potential from the first principles is very expensive computationally. What docking programs generally do is they use a scoring function, which is a function tuned to recognize the promising conformations and to predict the affinity as much as possible. This said, let us begin the actual demo.
Okay,
I'm
going to stop this and give you a little bit of a notion of what he's talking about. Let me kind of make things a little simple. Now, what's our primary goal? Our primary goal is to say, I have a protein. It has some energy, and because we call this an ensemble energy, because it's so many different atoms connected together in so many different ways, each of them vibrating, things translating, things rotating, things, side chains of the amino acids swinging about, atoms, vibrating, kind of a secondary structure, global movement. All these energies are taken together over, a few thousand atoms. So you can't just say, well, it's an between atom A and atom B. Okay, so this falls into what is called the area of statistical thermodynamics. So he talked about entropy, which is the measure of, it's always called S, or the entropy change is called delta S, which is a measure of the chaos of a system. And if you can look back quickly, it's related to the second law of thermodynamics. But what they do in statistical thermodynamics is use thermodynamics principles, but actually do the calculations in completely different ways, summed over large systems. Okay, so you have a large system and all the internal energies associated, all the vibrational, the bonding energies associated with that, and you come up with one energy. And that energy changes, and at every step it's calculated from the energy where it's really it's ground state energy, or the lowest energy, or the most stable energy, to you do something to it and its energy increases. Now what happens is, here comes a ligand which is a lot smaller and has its own energy system, and you then want to find that ligand fitting into a region of the protein such that the combination energy is one thing, is that the energy of the ligand in the binding region has to find a place where it's the most stable. Think of it as, you sit in a beanbag chair versus on a nice soft couch versus on a hardback sofa versus on a chair. And what you want is a beanbag chair, for example, will fold around you, making you well ensconced, right? You'll be very comfortable. So in this weird analogy, you literally have to have a conformation. That's why it's not confirmation with confirm, but it's conformation. It's the various structural positions that a ligand can adopt. So you want to make sure that the ligand, once it's in the binding region, is in its most stable conformation, or whatever position it is, or in a stable set of conformations, because nothing ever sits in there without moving. There's always some sort of vibrational, some translational energy associated with the ligand. So that's what you want to find. And then what you want to do is not just find the energy of the ligand in its most stable position, structural conformation in the binding region of the protein. You also want to make sure that the protein ligand complex, this new entity that's formed, is also in its most stable. Okay, so now we're talking about energy. So let's look at something which is called a typical potential. It's called the Lennard-Jones potential. Okay, and it's a typical potential. What is the point of it? Okay, so this the Lennard-Jones potential is typically used. Just let's look at the picture here. Okay, let's not worry about much else. So let's say we're measuring the potential energy. Okay, and this is the Lennard-Jones potential is an equation, and you don't get fixated on the equation. I'm just using this as some sort of an example. Okay, some sort of an example. So you have one atom is positioned here at 0, and think about it this way. the other atom is being brought towards this atom, and think of this as a kind of a mathematical graphical representation of bond formation. Okay, and you have another atom which is being brought towards this the first atom from infinity. Now, when the second atom is at infinity, you're not going to have any interactions, right? Because they're just too far away. But as you bring the other atom, this atom, let's pretend it's stationary, it's not doing anything. As you bring this other atom towards it, you'll realize, and remember, two ways of looking at it. One is attraction means the energy is low. Repulsion means the energy is high. So as you bring these two atoms together, they call it the dipole-dipole attraction. But this attraction is combined. What kind of combination? So first of all, you have the positively charged nucleus of one atom attracted to the electronic cloud over the second atom, and the positively charged nucleus of the first atom, of the second atom, attracted to the, okay, so there's a lot of attractive interactions. And as you get closer and closer and closer and closer and closer, this attractive interaction increases. Okay, it increases up to a point that the energy is really low, and that is what is called a stable, right? And so you might actually call that the bond length or the bond distance. But what's happening is, so first of all, you have the positively charged nucleus with an attractive interaction with the negatively charged electron cloud of the other atom, and vice versa. But as you bring these atoms together, the electrons now begin to repel. Okay, so there's opposing repulsive force. But then the electronic attraction is still winning over. The attraction forces are still winning over up to a point where you reach here, and then you'll see that the repulsion increases. Why? Because now it's not just that the electrons are repelling each other, but before they were not being, but before the attractive forces were winning over. But now, because they are close enough together at that bond length or bond distance, so this, you can say this is kind of the bond distance, and I use kind of because this is just a representative to illustrate a point. The nuclei, the positively charged nuclei, are now close enough that they begin to repel each other. So shoving these two atoms closer together is going to cause a repulsive interaction, and the energy is going to go really high. Okay, so if you look at it as from an energy standpoint, this is the point of low energy. Now imagine this ensemble calculation where we have a lot of energy, and let me pull back slightly just to see what he's trying to say here. Okay, so now we have this, now the energy is really complicated, and even he's given you a simple version of the energy. And what you want is, you want those two entities, the protein and the ligand, to interact in such a way that you have to, and your calculations are continuously calculating the energy at every point. And you want the energy to go lower and lower and lower and lower and lower. And he talks about something until you say that the energy does not go lower anymore. And then you say, oh great, now I have my most stable interaction, the conformation of the ligand and the configuration of the protein, which give me my most stable positioning. There's a problem there. So the question is, how do you calculate that? Remember, you're not really looking at any of this graphically, right? There's calculations happening in the background. He also talks about something that's computationally very expensive, because if you do these calculations, you have to have a really high-level system, like a supercomputer or something, to use these calculations, because they take a lot of time, because you're calculating too many interactions. In the Lennard-Jones potential, for example, I'm just talking about two entities, right? Now think about entities that are bonded together. Think about the London's forces, the dispersive forces. Think about Van der Waals forces. All these interactions are contributing towards that ensemble energy. Okay, that's what he's talking about. Again, I'm not really trying to explain what he says. I'm just going to just kind of give you a sense of what you want, what you want to take out of it. Okay, so again, we're looking for the best energy, the best interaction, the best docking configuration, the best docking conformation for a ligand is the result of trying to say that, oh, my entity, my complex, ligand protein complex is its most stable. And when we think of most stable, we think of lowest energy. So when he talks about this, why does he say global minimum versus local minimum? And the reason he says this is if you look at this profile, it's the energy profile is not as simplistic as this. The energy profile could be a bunch of hills and the energy profile could be a bunch of ups and downs and hills and valleys and so what happens, for example, if you have the energy and you say, well, I'm going to calculate it at one point, and then it's like, okay, now let me see if the energy can go any lower. So I do one more calculation and I do this iterative process, and at every step I calculate the energy, and it's like, oh, the energy is lower, can we go lower? And so the question then is, how low do you go? That's the computational intensive part of it, right? How low do you go? And how do you decide that you've hit the bottom? And so how you decide when you hit the bottom is you take every step, you calculate the energy, you make sure it goes low, and then you say, well, let's say it's not going to go any lower anymore, because the next step that you do the calculation, the energy calculated is slightly higher. And you're like, oh, okay, I kept going lower and lower and lower until I hit some sort of a bottom, and now I'm going up, which means the step before that should be my lowest energy. But do we know that that's the ultimate lowest energy? Right? Why? For example, you see this profile. If I follow the profile that he's using, the lowest energy in this system is here, right? And so if you say I go here, I do the calculation, lower, 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 and I say, oh, it's gone higher now, which means I've already hit my minimum. But if that's just a minimum, that's not the real minimum for the entire energy landscape of this particular interaction, then that is what is called a local minimum. And then you say, oh, it's going higher, 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 higher. And you say, okay, I guess I hit my lowest energy until the next step, it just goes completely low and you'll get the lowest energy. So that's a global. But if you look at this energy profile he's trying to tell you, he says, well, getting stuck in this kind of a minimum is not necessarily the best, not necessarily the best thing, because it's like, oh, it just goes low, and then the next step, the energy goes really high. So something a little more gradual might actually be ideal. That's what he's trying to say, okay? All right, let's keep going. And what we are going to do is, as this goes, we'll
going to start AutoDock Tools.
Okay, so AutoDock Tools. So what I'm going to do is, again, we're going to do this simultaneously. And so I'm just going to type in MGL. So I'm going to look for MGL Tools, and I'm going to see the executable. And look, he's saying, let's try AutoDock Tools. Okay, so it's going to kickstart. You can see the picture is slightly different, so it's a slightly different version. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take these tools, and I'm going to open this in slightly a different kind of almost like run both things parallelly. Okay, so here's my AutoDock Tools. Okay, and this is the cool part about this software is it'll allow me to run this in so you'll see exactly what's going on in terms of the tutorial. So I'll just switch back and forth. Okay, so let's continue with this. So I've already opened it, so we'll let's watch the whole thing load. Okay, as you can see, his face picture is slightly different in AutoDock Tools than what we have, and that's because he's using an older version.
And I'm going to separate the dashboard widget. so that both of the windows can fit on my screen.
So I think we can safely run both things on the same screen. Okay.
That both of the windows can fit on my screen. File, Read Molecule, My Documents, Vina Tutorial. This is where I put the input files for the tutorial. I'm going to open protein.pdb.
Okay, so let's stop there and see what he did. So we go to File, Read Molecule, and I know that our stuff was, I just couldn't find where it was, so I put it in the download. And Vina, Vina tutorial is, I remember that's where we put our stuff in. So Vina tutorial, I think we already have it open, the Vina tutorial, so I'm not going to worry too much. I know it's Vina tutorial in downloads. Vina tutorial, okay, and because we're going to find it here, I'm going to open Vina tutorial, and he says open protein. Okay, so the protein is being looked at. Obviously, you already have colors built into it. See something else that he's used in terms of the dashboard widget. We already have the protein, and right now, what does it say? You can see the various things that you can do with it. So, for example, the one that's lighted. And again, this is one of the reasons why you can use MGL tools as a visualization tool. Okay, you can use it as a visualization tool also. So again, this just tells you that you're going to have the protein using, you know, dots, but kind of just the bonds shown to you. Okay, again, you can use the right click. You can use the right click to translate. You can use the left click to rotate, and you can use I think the middle button. I'm using the middle wheel to zoom in and out. So you can see how this works, right? So one of the things that we can also do in this case is maybe make this a little smaller. Okay, make this a little smaller. Just delete everything or close, minimize everything else, and make this and make our business a little bigger. Okay, so this is the video we're watching. This is what we are doing at the same time.
Most PDB structures do not have hydrogens, and we have to add them with edit hydrogens, add polar only.
Now, this is the question that you want to ask yourself. Why do protein structures do not have hydrogen atoms? Okay, why do protein structures do not have hydrogen atoms? And the answer is very simple, because X-rays bounce off electron density. Typically in a hydrogen atom, when a hydrogen atom is attached to a larger molecule, most of the density is kind of pulled away from hydrogen anyway. So if you say, oh, I'm going to rely on a position of hydrogen, the nucleus of the hydrogen based on its electron density is already shifted. And because its electron density is already shifted away, the position of the hydrogen you're going to get is wrong. Okay, you're not going to get where the nuclear position of hydrogen is. So what, on the other hand, we understand bond lengths and geometries, hybridization, etc. So you can create idealized position of hydrogens attached to the heavier atoms. And when you say heavy, you say the hydrogen attached to the carbon, or the oxygen, or the nitrogen, or the phosphorus, etc., or the sulfur, etc. Okay, all right. So let's see what he does.
I'm going to open protein.pdb. Most PDB structures do not have hydrogens, and we have to add them with edit hydrogens add.
So edit hydrogens add, and I think he's going
polar only. Okay.
Okay, so polar only. Okay, and you can see right away the little blue-white things showed up with the additional bond. So the hydrogen heavy is a blue colored thing with it. So and you can tell very quickly that we actually have hydrogens. Okay, he's going to do something similar.
Now AutoDock Tools added all the polar hydrogens. They're required by the PDBQT file format.
The way this video is rendering, it doesn't look like you can see many the hydrogen atoms, right? So this is the black and white is obviously an older version. The version that we are looking at here is a newer version, and so you can tell that the hydrogens have been added. It's a lot more stark.
I can use the dashboard widget to display the molecular surface.
Okay, so he says use the dashboard widget. So let's look at what are the widgets. So it's like put everything in terms of sticks and balls, like, okay. Then the other one is display atomic spheres for the protein. Then the next thing is, for example, if you want secondary structure, then the ribbon pattern, and we'll just do that. So again, click on that. You can see that, this is the structure, and here is the secondary structure. So you can see a lot of the loops. You can see a lot of the helices, and I'll just click off on that. Okay. Let's look at the other things while we're at it. So for example, this is the, that's the same. This is the spherical, every atom is represented by a spherical ball. So you can see the pinks are the carbons. The yellows are the typical sulfur. So there's a methionine, cysteine here, there. The blue are that's fairly standard. Typically they don't render carbon in pink, but I think they figured out that it's so many carbons in here that they think it actually might be better to the contrast is much better if they render it in pink. Blue is nitrogen. That's the default in these kinds of representations. White is hydrogen. Blue is nitrogen, and red is oxygen. And so you can see as the carbon alpha chain goes, there's all kinds of hydrogens, and the yellows are the typical for sulfur. Okay, so that's not what we want to see, but I just wanted to show you while he's talking about the surface. For example, here's the ball is kind of the stick method, where the bonds are thickened into sticks. But we'll take that away, and we'll go to display the molecular surface. Now, the rendering of the surface, depending on how good your program is, or how good your computer is, it'll take a little longer. Now, why do we need the surface? Because this doesn't give you a really good idea of where the spaces might be. You see, I mean, you might say, well, yeah, I kind of see a space there, maybe a space there, but in a 3 dimensions, for example, here there seems to be a nice big space, but we're never really aware of how those spaces are going to render. And that is one of the reasons why we need the surface, because see how immediately spaces, potential docking sites become immediately visible. Unless that's the same one, here's another hole looking thing, but maybe not a lot of space. It seems, so just from looking at this, it seems like this sees the most likeliest place. And this is one of the reasons there are different ways in which you can render your protein, but the best clearly is to see as a surface, because that will give you a really good perspective as to where the ligand might actually reside. Okay? All right. So let's continue with the video.
Or hide it. or color the atoms by their type, and so on.
So a lot of the color the atoms by the type is now taken out of the equation in the more updated, upgraded versions of the software, for the simple reason that it's already done as a default, and before it used to not be done as a default. But let's look at those triangles. What choices do we have? It labels the protein, okay, it labels the chains, etc. And here's another one, and that is, for example, you can get colors. So you can kind of color, color based on what you want. And coloring is really good in terms of whenever you need to, to publish something and you want to contrast something, and you kind of get good at using this software, okay? But these are the main ways of doing this. And again, you can see that we can upload the protein. It's not ready yet for docking. We can upload the protein, you can upload the ligand, and then you can kind of see everything at the same time, okay? All right, let's keep going.
I'm going to click Grid, Macromolecule, Choose.
Okay, so Grid, Macromolecule, Choose. And there's the only one thing to be chosen,
Protein,
right?
Select Molecule.
Okay, again, so I'm going exactly step by step. So, when you need to ever do a docking, just keep the video on the side, or you can keep whatever presentation I have on the side. And my presentation is more of a teaching, kind of get an overview of what's going on. But once you understand the point of this quick lecture, you might just say, okay, now I understand enough of it. I'm just going to keep the video on the side and just follow the instructions step by step. So again, he clicked on protein and he selected molecule. Okay, so contains non-bonded. This is just a warning. Let's just ignore it. And remember I said he created the PDBQT. Okay, now let's do this. The PDBQT file that's created, let's save it. We need to save it exactly where. And I'm just because my folder is downloads, I'm just going to go to Vina tutorial, and I'm going to, in Vina tutorial, I'm going to save PDBQT files, and that's the protein. It was available as a PDB file. I'm just going to create it as PDBQT. Okay, and there's my saved file. I can open the I open the directory, the folder. Okay, and I can keep this open. Vina tutorial. Okay, that's how it is. And then I see my protein PDBQT. Okay, let's let him finish this.
Okay. And I'm going to
again, you see,
save
created the same thing.
The protein PDBQT file in the same directory.
Okay, and saved. Now, let's stop it for a second.
Grid.
And
Grid.
Okay, let's stop. Okay, what are you doing? Now let's stop that for a second and go and take a look at what the PDBQT looks like. Okay, so again, just for perspective, we'll open protein PDBQT in Notepad. Okay, and so for example, here's our protein PDB. Okay, we've already discussed this. And look at the protein PDBQT. So obviously he talks about that format. Everything else is exactly the same. Everything exactly the same. Let's see what else they have here. What else does he have? Now they put in the hydrogens, right? So now the protein data bank, the PDB format has changed because all the protein, and once again, this is a kind of an idealized hydrogen representations based on what we understand in terms of, the tetrahedral geometry or trihed or a pyramidal geometry, etc. Now, this is the only difference. This is another column that's added, and it seems as if there's some sort of a charge consideration here. And Q is the kind of the universal. If any of you remember any of your electricity, Q. I is the current in amperes. V is the potential difference. So that's the so V is a potential difference, I is the current in amperes, R is the resistance, for example, in ohms, and Q is the charge. Okay, so there's some sort of a charge consideration is included here, and so that So that's the charge that's included. And you can tell which are the guys that are negatively charged. For example, the nitrogen is, the oxygen has a bigger negative charge, okay? And then you have the sulfur here, because this is methionine. The sulfur has a charge, but not as big as the oxygen, right? So here, of course, the charge is a little bigger. And so again, negative charges, positive charges. So there's some sort of a charge consideration that takes place here. So that's the difference between the PDB and the PDB-QT. It's one more column added. Okay. All right. Let's minimize this and then keep going. What is he doing now? What is he doing this for? Because when the first program to do this was called DOCK. It was developed at UC San Francisco, and the second program that did was AutoDock. Now what you had to do was you had to do this void volume calculations. So you almost you flooded the protein with water. Okay, and water, the hydrogens were excluded, and some sort of effective atomic radius was used for the radius of a water molecule, and you flooded it with water, and just based on the sphere calculations of water, whenever water fit into these voids, these openings, these spaces in the protein, just by summing over the number of waters that fit without running into another atom because of some sort of a steric condition, these were calculated. That's how you calculated the volume. And then it's like you calculated all the void volumes, and you say, oh, that void volume where it fit into that seems like the place, because that's the only volume that you have that will actually accommodate this particular this ligand. Okay, and now, however, in the case of AutoDock Vina, you've got something slightly different. You actually have a box. Okay, it's a box, and you can do the X, Y, Z coordinates, etc. You can center the box wherever you want, and you want to center the box in a place where there is a space. And clearly, just no matter how you rotate and twist and turn this, it looks like this is the only place where a space kind of exists where your ligand might actually fit. Okay, now, but before that, let's just go back to exactly how he has it here. And look, because once we have the PDB-QT, that pink colored thing is gone. Okay, now what did he say? Go to grid, go to grid box, and our box begins to open. Okay, and what you see here is the box is already formed. Okay, the box is already formed. So what you're going to have to do, and I'm talking about it from the perspective of the exam, what you're going to have to do is make sure, and look, I'm going to rotate this, is the box is properly positioned. So rather than calculate void volumes, you actually stick a box in there. Okay, then you change the size of the box, you center it in such a way that it really does not run into anything, that it actually fits into this space where there are no atoms poking through it, which might affect the eventual docking because of all these clashes. So that's the kind. So the box has now been created, and you have a grid. And again, for the purpose of this tutorial, he's going to tell you exactly what to do with the box. Now, if you look at the box that I have here and the box that he has here, okay, the grid points per match will tell you the size of the box. It tells you how to center it, how to offset it, etc. Right now, as it stands right now, and I'm just going to drag our box compared close to his box, and you'll see, okay, you'll see that all the numbers are the same. Okay, let's see here. Let me see if this gets a little bigger so I can, yeah, okay, 6400. Just want to make sure that I have the picture correct. And where'd our box go? Okay, and so you'll see that every number here, 40, 40, 40, 0.375, 15.873, etc., 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 all of these are the same. Okay, so we are exactly at the same starting point. Again, so what is the point of this is that we take this box, and and we'll fashion it in such a way that without any clashes, the box is what you're going to put your ligand into. Okay, so this box just looks really big right now, and it says, well, how can but all of this grid option is designed to size the box in such a way that the ligand will fit without any clashes with the surrounding protein. All right, let's keep going.
We have to choose the part of the receptor where the docking program will be looking for docked informations of the ligand. This is called the search space. I can move the receptor with the right mouse button.
I'm going to stop here for a second and say, well, let's do this something slightly different. Use the middle mouse to expand, so at least it takes space, and then the right can be used to. The right can be used. I'm using ergonomic mouse, so it's slightly weird, but I'm going to kind of fill it as far as it'll go, and then translate it down, and another fill it as far as it'll go. Okay, I think we're good here, but we should be able to follow this just as well. Okay.
I can also rotate it with the middle button and move it close.
Now, this is just a correction. He uses the middle button to rotate it. Again, I don't know how it would work with the Mac users, but the left-hand side is always used to rotate. The right hand, for at least for Windows users, is always used to translate, and the middle button is used to zoom. That doesn't work in every case. It has to be set up that way.
Closer or farther away with the scroll wheel. In fact, I don't have a middle button, and clicking on the scroll wheel works the same way. For the center of the search space, I'm going to use these values. 11 for X, 90.5 for Y, and 57.5 for Z.
Okay, so why did he do that? He's obviously practiced this a lot, right, before he created the video. Make sure that it works correctly. And so that's what we are going to do, right? So it's 11. So most of it seems to be the same, not much different, but then the 90.5 and 57.5, that specific is not there. Now you can see that the thing has gotten really big, and then we'll do some sort of offset.
Sometimes you have to hit enter to update the view. We also have to choose the sizes of the search space. AutoDock Tools measures the sizes in points instead of angstroms. To convince it to use angstroms, we can set this dial to 1.0, which is a scaling factor.
Okay, that's what we'll do. It's like a wheel, right? So this graphical, so that makes it really gigantic, right? 1. And then we'll kind of narrow it down from there. So he wants to change the points using these points. Okay, so let's let it go.
For the sizes, I will use the following values. 22 for X, 24 for Y, and 28 for Z.
Okay, let's do that. So we've got 22. So you can see how the thing kind of narrows in real time. Oops, 20. Oops, 22. Ooh, wow. I wish you could type it in and just 22. 24. Oops. oops, 24, and then 28. Okay, all right. Now we're at the same place as he is. Somewhere during this demonstration, I rotated this a little weirdly, so that's fine. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but eventually, he's created that box. Now you see that the box is way bigger than the thing in which we're going to. So that's going to be some more work.
I don't have to save anything here. This step is just to visualize the search space. But I have to remember these values to use them directly with Vina later. Now let us open the ligand. Ligand, input, open, my documents, Vina tutorial.
So, ligand, input, open. It just goes to the downloads, Vina tutorial. We're looking for all files or Pdb files, and ligand. Okay. Now let's go with the video.
Ligand.pdb. Okay. We can hide the protein so that we can see the ligand better.
Okay, now what he did was, let me stop this. He actually killed the box. So we know what numbers these are, right? And we can. He eventually recommends that we write it down somewhere. So, but we'll come to that later. So 22, 24, 28, 11, 90.5, 57.5 with spacing of 1. So the box is gone. Now, again, you see that we opened the ligand, right? We opened the ligand here. So we can deselect the protein. Oops. We can hide the protein. It's gone. And you can see here, here's our ligand. It's shown up, okay? Which is much like what he did. And one more thing before we continue. So for example, here you see the ligand. There's not much, just the ligand, right? It's just one more entity. But, if you have a protein, you see this whole B chain, you can actually very systematically change, hide, keep, etc. every residue in the protein, right? And so again, as a visualization tool, this is really cool. Okay, but we're not using it right now, and the protein obviously is hidden, but we're going to work with the ligand. Okay, so what he's done is, you can see he's expanded it. Okay, and he's rotated it. He rotated it, so we'll see. So I'll try and get it in about the same position as he has. Okay. Let's translate it a little bit. I'll make it a little smaller also, so we can actually fit it in here. Takes a little getting used to, and I have an ergonomic mouse which I have a hard time with, so because it's relatively new, and I'm not quite sure of all the nuances of it. It takes a little while. Okay, so rotate it a little bit. Oops, rotate it a little bit, translate a little bit, and rotate it some more. I think we're getting there. Okay. Okay, so that's kind of, I'm okay with that. It kind of looks the same. Maybe. Whatever. All right, so let's continue. That's where we are.
I recommend using ligand structures that already have the correct hydrogens. This way, when you open them using AutoDock tools, AutoDock tools will automatically merge the nonpolar hydrogens and leave the polar hydrogens needed by PDBQT. Now let us look at the rotatable bonds and the ligand.
So what he's talking about is, because of the ring structure, etc., there are, again, and this is to find the conformations to see how, how these ligands will twist and turn and fit. You can't just take that whole thing as one blob, right? Because that's like if you have some sort of a plastic thing, and you just say, well, I'm going to jam it in some sort of a space in the stiff way. But if you can mold and twist and turn it to fit something, then and obviously plastic is a lot more pliable. But in the case of bonds, we have to make sure that all the bonds, only the bonds that are rotatable, will give you that freedom. Right, bonds that cannot be rotated will not give you that freedom. So you have to take into account that don't force a bond to twist when it's not supposed to.
Torsion tree, choose torsions.
Okay, so ligand, torsion tree, choose torsions, and it tells you now here this is wrong. He's got 6 out of 32. I think now they have something a little better. It's 7 out of 32. So it's actually calculated, and it's also colored the bond. So what bonds did it color? It colored the green bonds. Okay, the green is rotatable. The magenta is not rotatable because it's got these two big ring systems hanging off of that bond. So that's going to be rotatable. And so you're not rotatable, and the red, which is a ring, for example, you cannot rotate the bond, right? So that's non-rotatable in the sense do not rotate, cannot rotate, which is red, and can rotate, which is green. So they're counting 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, right? 1, 2, just show you this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's a carbon here. 7. Okay.
AutoDock tools colors the rotatable bonds in green and the non-rotatable bonds in this color. We can make these bonds rotate.
He was trying not to say pink, but I guess the point is magenta.
By clicking on them, and I'm going to make this bond rotatable next to the.
So let me stop for a second. Notice what he had. He had 6 bonds. He had 6 bonds rotatable. Okay, let me just expand that. Now, you probably already saw it. He has 6 bonds rotatable. We had 7 bonds rotatable. So the question was, somewhere along the line, he wanted to show you that by clicking on a bond, this was, I think this was not rotatable. Let's pull the video back a little bit. Okay, let's see here. Let's pull it back a little more. Okay, so you can see this bond or this bond was decided to be non-rotatable. Okay, this was in the older version. But then he goes ahead and allows it to be rotatable. So if you click on a bond, it would make it rotatable. Okay, now in the upgraded version, the updated version of the software, they just decided to leave this as rotatable, and that's why when this tutorial was created, he had number of rotatable bonds as 6 out of 32, and we right away have 7 out of 32. Okay.
Clicking on them, and I'm going to make this bond rotatable next to the aromatic ring. Now we have 7 rotatable bonds and 1 non-rotatable bond in the middle. I'm going to click Done and save the ligand structure as PDB-QT.
Okay, so it's done, and let's see what he does. Output. Okay, let's do that. So ligand, output, save as PDB-QT, and once again we got to find the Vina tutorial, and save it as ligand PDB-QT. And once again, let's open the folder and see that now we've got a ligand PDB-QT. Let's open that in Notepad++, and so you have the protein PDB-QT, which actually I told you had a charge element here. The ligand PDB-QT has it tells you things like rotatable bonds. Okay, it tells you all this additional stuff. A for active, I for inactive. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rotatable bonds, 1 non-rotatable bonds, and then there's the unrotatable bonds, and those are part of the rings. And then, just like PDB-QT, we actually have these charge elements that are included in here. Okay, and so let's look at the ligand PDB, and so you have essentially, okay, you've got about 39 atoms. Okay, lots of the atoms from the rings, and here you have the exact same thing, but now it tells you these branches. Okay, it gives you a little bit more information. So that PDB-QT, and this is important because rotation is going to occur at these bonds. So that's more information for the PDB-QT, in addition to all that charge stuff that was not there in the PDB formatted file. Okay, so let's keep going. Let's see here, and let's open our thing too.
Now we can close ADT because we don't need it anymore. We're almost ready to run Vina.
Okay.
Start.
Let's close. Okay. And it's gone. All right, we're almost ready to run Vina. So let's see what he's going to do.
Programs, accessories, command prompt, and change directory to my documents, Vina tutorial.
Okay, now let's try. We're going to command, we type cmd, and we're going to Vina tutorial, and we know that our Vina tutorial is in downloads. Okay, and we know it's in another, because I had to unzip the file, it showed another file. Okay, that's where we are right now. So let's see.
Vina is installed by default under Program Files, the Scripps Research Institute, Vina. I'll use this option, --help, to print the other options.
Okay, let's try this now. Okay, so we have Vina is in our programs files x86. So we have C : program files Okay, so it knows it's correct. The Scripps Research Institute. And again, like for example, if this was Linux, it would lose it with all these spaces. But the fact that this is in quotes tells you that you are allowed these kinds of spaces, right? So, and Vina, and then, oops, I want to make sure that exe. And again, you can -- help. Help is not recognized. So let's see, what am I missing? Oh yeah, I didn't close it properly. Okay, same thing. Let me make this a little bigger. I didn't close it correctly. So you've got all these additional things. Now these are instances of information, and we let Dr. Trott talk about it. It'll tell you these, remember that positions 22, 24, 28, and what is it, 11, 90.5, 57.5. I'm sure you all remembered. To put all of that information, how many cycles, remember that thing he talked about, that computational expense for trying to, when you try to really find the global minimum, and it takes a lot longer, and it's a lot more computer intensive. All of that is part of those considerations. Okay, so let's see what he has for us. How do we put this together? I suspect what he's going to do is he's going to create a batch file and run this in batch. Okay, that is, several, rather than do one thing at a time, he's going to actually put all that 22, 28, 24, the offsets, etc., and he's going to put that in one batch and just run the whole thing as one single script.
As you can see, Vina requires the names of the files for the receptor and the ligand. I can use this option to specify the receptor file, protein.pdbqt, and so on. However, sometimes it's more convenient to use a configuration file.
And when he talks about a configuration file, he says where we can put, we can, rather than do one command at a time and then hope that the output of one command is actually goes as the input of the next command, you put everything in a configuration file, also called as it's like a batch file.
Let us create one. Start.
So he's going to use nothing more fancy, nothing fancier than a notepad file, and we have notepad++. So okay, well, so we're ready too.
My documents, Vina tutorial, new, text document, and I'll call the configuration file conf.txt.
Okay, so once again, we're going to create a notepad file. We're going to call it conf.txt. And now once again, if you know your whatever Mac users, once again, whatever you use, an ASCII file, a text file for editing, etc., that should be just as good, because again, it's just looking for the internal commands that you put into that file. And while we're at it, I might as well just open it in Notepad++, and then because that's the one we have to populate now. Okay, so I'm going to make a smaller version of it.
And put the options in there.
And the options that he's talking about are options that arise from that offset, the position, the box position that we had initially put in there.
Receptor is protein.pdbqt. The ligand is ligand.pdbqt. The geometry of the search space is you may remember, center x is 11. The y coordinate of the center is 90.5. The z coordinate is 57.5. The sizes are 22, 24, and 28. These are all the required options. Vina produces one or more binding modes as its output. Each of the binding modes goes into its own PBQT file, and the names of the files are determined by the name of the ligand. Sometimes it's more convenient to put all the binding conformations into one multi-model PBQT file. For this, we can use the option all, and we'll call the file all.pbqt. Another important option is exhaustiveness. By default, it equals 8, and exhaustiveness determines how exhaustively the search algorithm looks for the global minimum in other binding modes. It is the exhaustiveness parameter is roughly proportional to the time the algorithm takes. The longer it runs, the less likely it is to fail to find the global minimum. As a programmer, I could not choose one value appropriate in all cases. You might be doing virtual screening when the CPU time is very valuable to you, or you might be docking one ligand when you can afford to spend more CPU time. In this case, we'll just accept the defaults.
Okay, I'm going to stop the video just temporarily because I wanted to explain. I don't know if you are following, but if you cannot hear what he's trying to say. So, for example, if you say, well, where is all this stuff coming from? It's coming from here. Okay, all these choices. See, center X followed by what's called arg, and arg in this case is whatever information you want to put. That's called the argument, right? So center, size, receptor, the flex, the ligand, etc. All of that information, seed, exhaustiveness. This is all useful information. So the question is, for the purpose of this, he's said receptor equals protein.pdbqt. Now you could type all of that stuff here too. Okay, you could type all of that stuff here too, but that's not of interest to us because you can run everything in one shot. Okay, so let's try typing exactly what he has, and I'll speak over it. So receptor equals, remember we're not using the PDB file, you're using PDBQT. Okay, then as ligand equals, and again you can call this anything you want, and then I think it's all or out. Let's look at this again, because I think somewhere when I opened it said that out. See the out? Okay, this out is important because they don't call it all anymore. So the output file. Now the output file means that you're going to have a PDB file with the ligand already docked in it. Okay, that's going to be the output file. And if you ask for many different versions of it, that would be fine too. So I'll just call it all and .pdbqt. So now center X, that's the position, the central position was 11. And those are the positions. That is what the box enabled us to do. And again, in the exam, etc., when you're trying to do some of this yourself, you're going to have to try and figure out these positions. And so he obviously, the fact, because he was doing a tutorial, he didn't have to spend a lot of time at the tutorial, so he did a lot of this work before in terms of making sure that the box was exactly around this particular region that he knows it's going to be. Okay, and then of course the size X was 22, and again you can type all of this by yourself, but if you create this configuration file or like run everything in batch, that's what we can do. 24. Now he starts by putting something in here called as the exhaustiveness, and the exhaustiveness is here, and it says 8. Now, exhaustiveness of the global search, and remember, now go back to the discussion of where we're looking for a system. We are looking for a system energy. We're looking for the global minimum, not the local minimum. And again, you can go back to the discussion, my hand wavy kind of a discussion about some of this. But the exhaustiveness is 8. And again, the exhaustiveness depends upon how much of the computer processes you want to give to this. Now, if you go back to his closed caption thing, you'll see that he talks about virtual screening. Now, virtual screening is where you have one target receptor and 50,000 drugs, and he says, well, am I going to waste? And again, he says its exhaustiveness can be roughly translated to the computing effort, the computing processes you would like to use, the kind of the CPU, the kind of the RAM speed that you would need to use in order for this to work. So he says, leave it as default. Let's not worry about it. But for example, if you wanted the exhaustiveness to be, roughly proportionate to the time, so you would say virtual screening means, you said, I've got 10,000 molecules. I've created my box. I want to see 10,000 ligands. So you would give an exhaustiveness of just one and say, well, which one works nicely? And then you'll get 10,000 of those, and you can separate them. And then as you narrow them down to molecules that are useful, then you can increase the exhaustiveness of your search. Again, so it also depends upon your computing speed, right? So he says, well, let's not worry about it. But again, if you had just one ligand and you want to do it into the ground, you could give it a exhaustiveness where the computer would really take 10 hours, and you would just, leave it for the working overnight, and you'd come back later. Okay, that's kind of the point of it. So this is the exhaustiveness, and so he says, let's just leave it as a default. Okay, and so what we're going to do now is, because this is all the information we have, we're going to save it. That's what he's going to do.
I'm going to run Vina by providing the configuration file name.
Okay, so now he's running Vina, and again,
I don't have to put all the options in the configuration.
So let's do the same command again. But we're not doing help. We're not doing help. We're doing config conf.txt.
File. I can specify that the log file, there should be a log file, and should be called log.txt.
Okay, so again, in these kinds of commands, you can put more than one command at the same time. So the configuration is a conf file. You want to create a log file, and that is log.txt. You can call it anything, it doesn't matter. It's just that the log is going to be, because as this process goes through, you're going to actually see this stuff saved, kind of like the log file for our for the modeler. Okay, and it's going to save in log.txt. What else?
Now I can run Vina by hitting enter.
Okay, and so it takes a while, so let's run this. It's obviously starting. Okay, and let's watch his thing start, analyzing the binding site, etc., etc. And again, depending upon how quick your computer is. Okay, so what he did was he kind of sped the process up, to kind of get to the results.
I fast forward the program for you by pausing the movie encoding. It should actually.
So we'll wait.
Program run at these settings should take about a couple of minutes if you have a modern quad-core computer.
Okay, so again, our thing is also done. We had 6 different modes. He got 3. Again, like he said, he fast forwarded through the process. And now we're going to take a look at what the results are.
Longer if you have a slower machine, of course. By the way, Vina automatically detects the number of CPUs or cores you have and takes advantage of them to speed up the search. Those of you familiar with AutoDock may have noticed that Vina does not require you to pre-calculate the grid map files or to supply to determine the atom types in the grid maps. It calculates its grid maps automatically after it starts, and because it does it rather quickly, there is no need to save or read them from files. When Vina finishes, it prints the binding modes it found, in this case 3, and the corresponding affinity values. It also produces the output files. As you can see here, there are 3 new files for each for its own binding mode.
Okay, so we can now stop that and go to Vina tutorial and see we created all.pdbqt, and in that PDB we also have a log file, and see, we'll just look at that for the time being, and you'd see what it did was it calculated nothing fancy. It just calculated, again, whatever was going to be written to our output here. You know, in case, for example, the process takes too long and then there's an error or something and it wants to, or a warning, and you want to check on that, this is the better way to take a look at it. In this particular case, you see he's got all these additional files, Ligand out 1.pdbqt, but what we have here is just one all.pdbqt. Okay, so we'll just open it for the time being, and you'll see various different confirmations. Okay, various different confirmations, obviously many, and then you can always pick and choose between the one you want. But I'll let Dr. Trott finish about that.
The all.pdbqt file with all of the binding modes in one. We can open this file using pymol.
Use MGL tools. Oh, yeah. So here's this Python molecular viewer pymol, right? It doesn't show up as pymol. I'll just delete. I'll tell you exactly where it came from. You go to the MGL tools, and this looks very similar, right? So you go to MGL tools, and we started doing all the box etc. using AutoDock tools, and then use the PMV 1.5.6. Okay. Alternatively, if you've got pymol stored separately, you can use that too. Okay, so this looks kind of similar, right? All right, so let's see. So he just dragged and dropped. So let's go to read molecule, and we'll go to all.pdbqt. Again, this is in case you have it. Again, if you have pymol, feel free to use that. So we are still in downloads. And we go to all.pdbqt. And let's go to confirmations, for example. change models using, oh, never mind. Yes. So there you go. So I can see various different conformations, for example, and so that's basically I can go from conformation to conformation, and I can go back from conformation. And I got 6. This guy got 3. Let's let him talk now.
We can cycle through the binding modes using the arrow keys.
MB does the same thing.
The first binding mode is the best one, according to Vina.
So we'll go to the original one.
Also open the receptor file.
Now, so let's go to the first one. Yep, the first one. Yes, this is the best one according to, and just again, let's open it. Now, what is Dr. Trott doing? He says, well, okay, this is great, right? We actually have the ligand, but now we've got to actually look for. He said, now we actually have to look for the protein, so we know that the docking actually has taken place correctly. Okay, so I'll let him talk.
Protein.pdb.
Okay, let's do that. So we're going to read molecule, and now we're just going to go with the protein.pdb. So right away you see here's the protein, and the docking appears to takes place there, right? So that's what we are. Now the other thing that we can do is, and you can look at him too, is one thing we can do is make this a little fatter, display atomic sphere, display ribbon, display molecular surface for protein, but we're actually going to display make it a little thicker. Okay, make it a little thicker, and then maybe display the ball and stick. Okay, that's so you see the space. The space is it's got to find the right space, and then we can look at the surface of the protein, and right away you see the program fit it. See that? It's nicely sitting in here. Okay, and that tells you that yes, it did find the right place, it fit in the right place. If I click on all, and okay, now let's let him talk. So I'll do this. I'll just go to take the surface away, and I'll take all this other stuff away, and you can see now we are exactly where he is.
The experimental structure.
So it looks like something is messed up, but let's do this. So what he wants to do also is says, well, you want to compare how good is your comparison. And now this is obviously the result of an experiment, a crystallographic experiment. So you says, here is the structure that we have. How good is our docking when compared to the experimental ligand? Okay, and you can see it's pretty solid, right? So for example, we can go to the experimental ligand thing and just color it blue, all of it. Okay, and then we can, so you see how well it is, the terms of the coincidence. So it tells you that it's pretty solid in terms of comparing it to the see the blue, and then we'll just go and we'll call this the all part. We'll go and custom color it okay, and so you custom color it yellow, and now you can see a pretty good contrast. Okay, and you can also then put a sphere. You can put the sphere on the protein, and you can see that's where the thing takes place.
As
the video is kind of messed up.
The first binding mode that Vina determined is actually quite close to the crystallographic structure. Let us the receptor to see them better.
Okay, let's try that. Let's go into that and abstract out the protein. Okay, and this way we'll be able to tell how quite close, right? There's some few rotation issues, etc. But you see, it's actually pretty close. So computationally, it didn't.
Vina was able to do this even though all the rotatable bond torsion angles and the orientation of the ligand, as well as its position, were randomized. It could do that because the scoring function correctly identified the native conformation as the global minimum, but also because the search algorithm was able to find the global minimum. The search
So when he talks about the global minimum here, you go by the fact that the experimental position is the best position, and therefore energetically the most favorable position. Okay, and that's why he says the global minimum. So remember that trick about, well, did we find the global minimum? Are we stuck in some sort of a local minimum? Well, the fact that your structure is so close to the structure tells you that the global minimum was found. That's what he's trying to say.
Algorithm is stochastic, however, and with these settings for this input, there is some probability that it will not be able to find the global minimum. I think it's about a few percent in this case.
He uses the word stochastic here, and stochastic can be one of these things. It's actually used for what is called an ensemble calculation, because it tells you that we are determining things based on kind of a statistical probability, and which means that there will be an issue with in terms of kind of precise. Okay?
Determines a compromise between how exhaustively the search looks for the global minimum and the speed of the search. Increasing the exhaustiveness can dramatically decrease the probability of failing to find the global minimum. Well, this is it for now. I would like to thank people in the Molecular Graphics Lab for their input, and especially Stefano Forley for his help with this tutorial. Bye-bye.
Okay, I think that takes you to a point where you now know how to use it. Once again, there'll always be a couple of issues that you need to worry about. Keep this tutorial at the back of your mind, keep this lecture at the back of your mind, try and use it. One thing that is really dangerous when you try this docking is when you use the box, you'll realize that you want to use the box, and you want to build the box, you want to create the box, you want to create the box that has the right size, that's going to fit, that your ligand's going to fit in. Be aware, however, that when you make your box and you resize it, recenter it, etc., make sure that your box that you rotate it in every direction. Because sometimes what happens is when you resize and center your box looks like, oh, it looks like it fits. And then you turn it around, you rotate it around one of the axes, and I think, oh, a part of it is actually coming out of the protein. That's not good. Or another part is coming out of another part of the protein. That's not good, okay? So once you create a box, while you're doing your adjustments, make sure that you rotate it in every which way to make sure that the box that you built is contained within the and that's one danger. Okay, like I said, because we are looking for a three-dimensional notion on a two-dimensional screen, and that is always going to be the issue. Okay, so I wish you good luck with this. Again, once I finish this and I'll have it uploaded on YouTube, we'll get a chance to do something a little different, a little better, and that'll be part of your so this will be part of your exam too. And all right, I'm going to sign off now.